Jay Seegert here, Starting Point Podcast. We're talking science, faith, and a whole lot more. Buckle up, because it's go time. Jay Seegert here with the Starting Point Podcast. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. It's a continuation of the last episode. Before we get any further, just as a reminder, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you can stay updated. Tell a friend. Give us a good review if you find it in your heart to do so. We have a broad reach all across the globe, which is encouraging to me. Today, we are continuing our podcast series, another video thing. Also, you might just be listening to the audio. That's fine. You're not missing any visuals with this right now. But we have been interviewing Carl Teichrib. We're getting into some different worldviews here. We're going to be getting into interfaithism. Eventually, we'll be covering transhumanism, something you might not even be familiar with, but it sounds interesting, and trust me, it is. And so that's what we're doing on the broadcast. I am going to turn it over to Carl. He will recap his background, and then he will jump into today's topic, which is going to be talking about interfaithism. So again, Carl, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself again.
Hey, Jay, thanks again for hosting this podcast and letting us dive into this very important conversation together. So, my background, I've been a researcher on globalization for a number of years, going all the way back to the 1990s, full time since 1997. And with that, you take a look at so many different points of interest, kind of like think of it as being at the crossroads where you have worldview changes and challenges coming from multiple directions. They look like they're different things, but they all end up speaking that same language of Genesis chapter 3 and the Tower of Babel story, just a remake of it as mankind plays games of gods and looks to basically build Babel 2.0. And so one of the subjects that we tackle is the issue of interfaithism. It's a really important topic, one that for the most part the Christian community is I think probably largely unaware of. A way of saying it is it's the quest for spiritual politics, where religious groups, different faith traditions will put aside those things that separate them. And of course, for us as Christians, that means Jesus Christ. And we'll put those differences aside so that we can come together for things like social justice or fighting for climate change or any of the other agenda items that typically gets rolled out within the mainstream. And it's an important subject to tackle because at the core of it, interfaithism is saying that really all religions ultimately hold a kernel of truth, that there's really no exclusive voice of salvation, no exclusive voice of redemption. Rather, we need to be able to recognize that all religions have a pathway to God. And more than just that, that all religions need to work together now to create a world of peace. So I have a chapter dedicated to this. It's chapter 12 in my book, Game of Gods, The Temple of Man in the Age of Reenchantment. And that chapter is entitled, very simply, Spiritual Politics. So I think a good way for us as believers to open up is to take a quick peek at John chapter 18. And this is Jesus standing before Pilate. And we read this. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? Jay, Pilate asked the wrong question. He should have asked, who is true? Because the one who is true was literally standing right in front of him. Pilate was this close, but he missed the mark. And we see that the one who is true is the one who is literally the author of life, the one who has the exclusive claim to salvation, because he's the only one that raised himself from the dead. So there is no other religious leader that can make that claim and have it proven. And we see that historically in the record. And there's a reason why Paul in Colossians says this, speaking about Jesus, that God has delivered, he has delivered, verse 13, chapter 1, verse 13. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence. So Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, as laid out in John 14:6. He's the one who is preeminent. He is the one who has created all things, and he has power over principalities, authorities, and powers. There is no one like him. He is unique. He holds the position of excellence, and he is utterly exalted and holy. That's our starting point as Christians. In the interfaith movement, we have to push that aside, because if there's anything that is not tolerated in the interfaith movement, is that there are exclusive truth claims, especially truth claims around the issue of salvation, redemption, the problem of sin, and how sin is rectified. Um, that is considered, in many respects, anathema. And so I have, over the years, attended a number of interfaith events. I've been to the Parliament of World Religions in 2015, 2018. I did the virtual one in 2021. And then not last year, this is 2025, but in 2023, I was at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago, where we have literally thousands of religious leaders from all kinds of faiths and spiritual traditions coming together, putting aside their differences. For the Christians who are there, it's like, shh, don't talk about Jesus as exclusive. Instead, we will talk about how we can all work together to push for climate change or sustainable development or an ecologically enlightened state of affairs. Those become the major talking points. So, the question then for us as Christians, where in the world does this idea of interfaithism arise? How did we get here? The first interfaith event is really the tipping point for Western civilization in many respects. It was the 1893 Parliament of World Religions, with roughly 9,000 people or so who attended, and that happened in Chicago. Again, this is 1893, and it took place during the Chicago World Columbian Exposition, the Chicago World Fair, and they hosted a special parliament for religions. And at that point, we had an Indian Swami by the name of Swami Vivekananda who came and offered um, a different way forward, a way forward that said that man is not a sinner, that man can instead have a higher position, that we can, in essence, take kind of a position of divine likeness. Now, I've got my PowerPoints here. I'm just going to quickly open up and give you a couple statements from that parliament. The religion of the future, and this is from the 1893 parliament. Take note of the utopian dream. The religion of the future will be universal in every sense. It will embody all the thoughts and aspirations and virtues and emotions of all humanity. It will draw together all lands and peoples and kindreds and tongues into a universal brotherhood of love and service. It will establish upon earth a heavenly order. And so, Jay, this is one of the things that I see when I'm at either the Parliament of World Religions or some of the other interfaith events I've attended, and that is we are going to create heaven on earth. We're the ones who usher in paradise. We're the ones who, in essence, create a new Eden, and we do that together through this community of religions. Some of the early interfaith arguments arose out of the problem of war. And this is something that I know your listeners have heard. I've heard this myself from others. And that is this issue that religion is the cause of conflict, strife, and war. In fact, Ken Wilber, who is kind of he synthesizes Christianity and Buddhism. This is what he wrote at beliefnet.com. This is already from a few years ago. Throughout history, religion has been the single greatest source of human caused wars, suffering, and misery. In the name of God, more suffering has been inflicted than by any other man made cause. For every year of peace in humankind's history, there has been 14 years of war, 90% of which have been fought either because of or under the banner of God by whatever name. Now, the famous atheist Richard Dawkins, in his book The God Delusion, said something similar. He says a war might be motivated by economic greed, by political ambition, by ethnic or racial prejudice, by deep grievance or revenge, or by patriotic belief in the destiny of a nation. Even more plausible as a motive for war is an unshakable faith that one's own religion is the only true one. Well, Jay, which wars were started by this belief that Jesus Christ is the only way, the truth, and the life? Which ones? Yes, crickets, exactly. So I document this in Game of Gods. It took me quite a while to work through. But the 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. And so I took a look at the primary causes of the major wars that caused the death of 1.5 million and more. I didn't do less than that. I did that was my benchmark, 1.5 million. There's a lot of conflict in the 20th century that killed 1.5 million or more. And as you break it down, you realize that, no, religion classically understood is not the cause. There may be times when we wave a banner and say, yeah, God's on our side, but it's not the cause of war. So, I took a look at from the last 100 years what these conflicts were. And you have things like one of them that popped up that I didn't even know about was the Congo Free State War. And that took the lives of between 8 to 10 million and ended around 1908. And it was colonial profit and colonial power by the British in Africa. Then you have the feudal Russia, then World War One. World War One didn't start by us arguing over John 14:6. And as you go through the major conflicts, you realize that no, the Second World War wasn't caused because of John 14:6. Korean War wasn't caused by, John 14:6. The list goes on. And then when you consider the major genocides, you realize that it's for the most part done by atheistic regimes. Lenin, Stalin, yeah, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, exactly. And this is issues of political control, um, expansion of power, but it's not over issues of religion, not classically understood. But if we were going to raise this question, or pardon me, this claim that religion is the cause of wars and conflict, and in the name of religion we go to war, then religions have a responsibility to work for peace. And that becomes the argument for the interfaith movement in its earlier stages. We have to work for peace. Religious leaders need to come together, and if we can hold hands and sing kumbaya, we can transform the world and make it into something beautiful.
I'll interject real quick. Two things.
Yes.
A lot of one thing that I point out in a lot of my talks is there is a massive, massive difference between religion and Christianity. Religion is man's idea
Yes.
of God. The Bible is God's idea of God, and it's a relationship not rules and regulations. The other thing is, many times when someone does something bad, they might be claiming that they're a Christian, but they're not at all. And even if they truly are Christian, what they're doing is in direct opposition of the teachings of Christianity, where when an atheist does any of those things, it's very consistent with the idea of atheism. So we shouldn't judge a system, even if it's Christianity, based on people who violate its own principles. And that's something important for people to
Very
keep in
important.
mind as we think through those things. But go on, go ahead.
No, no, you're absolutely right, Jay, and that is important for people to understand that difference. In making this argument, however, that religion is the cause of war, it places upon us then the emphasis that we have to be the ones who bring about peace. And we bring about peace, therefore, by linking arms with other religious leaders from different faiths completely. And that's what the interfaith movement does, but it has morphed, it's gone beyond just this idea of bringing about world peace, all the way to the point of, hey, let's look at how we're going to restructure the world. So, an example, this happened when I was at the G8 World Religion Summit back in 2010. A lot of people know about the G8 or the G7 political summits. That's where heads of state from the major industrialized countries come together to talk about policy and to work through joint concerns and joint issues. A lot of people don't realize, however, that there are religious leaders who converge at roughly the same time, sometimes a little bit before, and they have their own interfaith forum on trying to give policy direction, recommendations, and all this goes eventually to the political leaders. And it's put in their lap, and it shows to the political leaders that the religious leaders, the religious community, has these certain issues that are fundamental, that are really key, that we have to now look at adopting. So the first one I attended was back in 2010. It happened in my province, Manitoba, at the University of Winnipeg. And there we had members of the Baha'i community, we had indigenous representation, we had representation from the Hindu community, from the pagan community, and a lot from the Christian community. Uh, National Council of Churches, Canadian Council of Churches, Church of England. There was a long, long list of Christian representation. But to give you a sense of what was being talked about, Jay, and again, I'm an observer, and this is what I do for my employment, my work, is to be able to document, analyze, and then communicate some of these trend lines so that the Christian community can be aware, so that we're not caught blindsided by this. So one of the things that kind of struck us as we went through that event was that the emphasis was that religious unity comes about as we all work together as different religions for social justice, for world peace, for what is called the common good. And it was really heady for the religious leaders in attendance, because all of a sudden they realized that prime ministers and presidents come and go, but religious leaders have the ability to sometimes stay for decades in their positions, and that they therefore have sometimes more power than national governments in the ability to adjust people's behaviors, values, and actions over a longer period of time, that they transcend governments. So some of the things we talked about was the need to create a new global financial system. We talked quite a bit about having a world taxation system, a new economic order as they were describing it. The Salvation Army representative described it this way: that it's not about having a bike for each, it's about learning to share one bicycle in community. I don't know, Jay. What does that sound like? Yeah. Uh, I mean, this is Cuba. This is North Korea. Like, why do these failed and destructive ideologies keep being recirculated? And in this case, now circulated within the Christian community, within the religious community in a broader sense, but even in the Christian community. Why are we always pulled towards these ideas of collectivism? All I can think of, Jay, is that The Babel story of Genesis, where we collectively come together to say, we're going to create our own order, we're going to create our own structure, our own system, and we're going to build this edifice to demonstrate and prove this point, that the shadows of that have never fallen very far. We're always underneath the shadows of that idea, and that it beats in our heartbeat. Bingo. And so I've had some people say, well, this is all conspiracy. No, it's not conspiracy. It's documentable, it's observable. You can go if you take the time and invest into it. I wouldn't maybe suggest it, but you certainly can go. And I think it's important that the Christian community realizes this, because we definitely are in an age when those trends and those influences are pushing forward. So a few of the other topics that came up were the issue of having a gospel for nature. We were told that we are the biggest parasites on the planet, that capitalists have to pay our eco debt, that all religions have to come together for a vision quest for Mother Earth, and that we need to empower the United Nations to make all this come together. Um, and the big thing, I think, for the faith leaders was a realization that they recognize that as their position enables them, they are now the new planetary statesmen. That was a big, a head blowing idea that, we have this position now that we can speak into global issues as religious leaders, at the same level as political players. So it's a very remarkable movement. Um, the one, though, that I think the one specific part of this movement that's really important is the Parliament of World Religions, and I mentioned that earlier. The first one, as I said, took place in 1893, and that sets the tone, Jay, for everything. And then the next one happens 100 years later, 1993 in Chicago. 8,000 people attend that. They talk about creating a global ethic. What's interesting is I had friends who were in attendance, and they watched as there was basically a brawl in the front row. I believe it was with a Hindu and a Sikh, or a Hindu and a Muslim. I can't remember how it all unfolded, but somebody said something that didn't, somebody took offense to it, and the brotherly love just evaporated, and human nature took hold, and they ended up in a brawl. So much for your big circle of love. Uh, the next one happened in 1999 in Cape Town, South Africa, and then Barcelona, and then Melbourne. And I jumped into attending the Parliament in 2015 in Salt Lake City with 10,000 people attending. The focus was on climate change and empowering women. We had some pretty big dignitaries talking on climate change, including one of the lead imams from Mecca. And then the next one happened in 2018 in Toronto, and the theme was inclusion and love. And we repeatedly were told that if you were a Republican or a conservative, if you were evangelical, you are on the side of intolerance, and we cannot tolerate you. No surprise. Yes. And then when I attended the one in 2023, it was remarkable how the theme was around freedom and democracy. And the whole talk, and I couldn't tell you, Jay, how many times I heard it, but the talk revolved around this idea that evangelical Christianity, conservative politics, this is anathema to freedom, anathema to democracy, and that we have to overcome those elements. It was pretty raw. So this is one of the takeaways from attending these kinds of events. And I've been going to interfaith events since 1999. You hear the language shift. So back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when I would attend an interfaith event, they would describe us, evangelical, Orthodox believing Christians, as fundamentalists. Okay, I can live with that. We can have a conversation around what that means. And then the shift began. We were called exclusivists. All right. Well, again, We can certainly work with that language. I do believe in the exclusive gospel of Jesus Christ. There's no question. Then the language shifted again, and we became extremists. And then by the time the 2018 Parliament came around, the language moved again more radically. We were called supremacists. And if you believed in nationalism, if you believed in conservative values, you were a supremacist. Now, at this point, you're already going, how in the world do I have a conversation in this kind of an environment without immediately putting a bullseye on my back? And then at the 2023 Parliament, the language moved once again, and now we were authoritarians and supporters of authoritarian regimes.
A quick interjection.
Yes.
Language and terminology is huge. And as a parallel that I just thought of, we used to talk about tolerance a lot, and many aspects of tolerance is great. I mean, we should tolerate. You shouldn't just kill someone because you disagree with them. So we certainly need to have some level of tolerance. And it sounded good, but then tolerance morphed to acceptance. So you're not just tolerating them; you like fully accepting them. Then acceptance morphed to celebration, where now you not only have to accept them, you have to actively celebrate with them. And so today you can't even, as a Christian, remain silent on some abhorrent behavior you see. If you're not actually actively supporting and celebrating, then you get ostracized and canceled and all those things. So I see the exact parallel to what you're talking about with the terminology. It's huge.
Oh, absolutely, Jay. This is so important for people to realize that whoever guides the direction of our cultural expression or language, whoever guides that direction, will end up having a lot of influence. There's a lot of pressure that comes with it. So all of a sudden, you find yourself cornered. You find yourself unable to speak without with having that fear now that if I do say something, uh, that's going to put a target on my back. And we've kind of ran into that for a long time, haven't we? I mean, in the Christian community, we've frightened ourselves, and we have become more afraid of man than God, and I'm guilty of that. And I think the interfaith movement just does this at an institutional level, where all of a sudden this is a kind of like the trend of the larger group. And now, how do you push back against that?
It's a huge thing with shaming. And I think of John chapter 12, where it talked about many other people believed in Jesus, but they wouldn't profess him publicly for fear of being kicked out of the synagogue by the Pharisees because they enjoyed the praise of man more than the praise of God. So even many Christians today, they know what God's word says, but they don't want to be shamed of people. They want people to know no, I care, I care. So whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it because I'm a nice person. I care, rather than what is the truth and how do we actually love them the best way, the way God tells us to, rather than you tell me what you need and I'll do it because I don't want to be the bad guy.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I know. So we find ourselves in a really interesting space, don't we? Um, it is challenging. And yet at the same time, I think that this opens up areas where we can have the ability to bring our voice forward if we do it in such a manner where there's love, grace, with truth, and sometimes even creativity. So I'll give you an example. At the 2023 Parliament, our little group of Christians, and there's a handful of us who go, I'm engaging at the research level, but we're also looking for opportunities to have conversations for Christ. And the group of people that I'm with, for the most part, they're involved in, call it maybe guerrilla evangelism, underground evangelism. Because at these events, every 10 feet, you can talk to somebody from another faith, and they want to have a conversation. And so we're there, whatever I think 11 or 12 of us at the last one, against 8,000 people. Not bad odds when you, not when you have the Holy Spirit, you know. And so we end up having these conversations where I thought there would be pushback. I thought there would be hostility towards us. But if we, as we approach it in ways that were loving, gracious, we would listen to them. And then we would offer a perspective they had never thought of before. So I'll give you an example. I had one lady who ended up having a conversation with, and in the handful of time, not very long at all, I had talked about this idea of the difference between oneism and twoism, going back to our first talk together, you and I had, that God is distinct, that he is different than the creation. And that is a biblical view of what we would call twoism, or what my friend Dr. Peter Jones has described as twoism: God first and then everything else, versus this idea of oneness, that man, God, and nature are all sharing the same essence. And so I brought it up from that perspective. And this lady, she listened, and when it was done, she just looked at me and from there, by the way, from there we went right all the way to the gospel, that Jesus Christ is the author of life. I have broken God's laws, and that I have demonstrated myself a sinner to God. And and then when it was all said and done, she's looking at me with big eyes, going, "I have never heard it said like this." And it was remarkable. So I asked her, "Where are you from?" "Delaware." And in my mind, I'm going, "Here we are. I'm in the United States. I'm in Chicago. I'm talking to a lady from Delaware, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Every community seems to have a cross, a church. The gospel message you think is known from coast to coast, and it is obviously not."
It's not. It's interesting historically. When you and I were younger, virtually everyone knew who Jesus claimed to be, and the story of him showing up here and dying on a cross, and he's the savior of the world. They didn't necessarily believe it personally or do much about it, but they knew. Now there's so many that Jesus, I guess he's some religious person, they know almost nothing about it. So we should never assume that people at least know the story. Sometimes we need to start from square one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the importance of starting at square one now means that we land literally at square one, and that is Genesis 1 1. And because we are living in an age where we say that nature is divine, or it has some sacred quality, that I am godlike, or I'm working to become a god from the New Age perspective, um, or that there is nothing outside of the created universe, there's nothing outside of nature. And so the biblical claim is no, that we have a God who is outside of time, space, and matter, who created time, space, and matter, and he loves his creation. He loves us. And in order to have that right relationship with him, we have to recognize that he indeed is Lord and Master. He is the only one. There are no competitors in his field. Nevertheless, within the interfaith movement, that idea that we have an exclusive singular God and that we're sinners, that is not looked upon favorably. And yet here we had this conversation at the 2023 Parliament of World Religions, and we had a number of conversations, Jay. For the most part, pretty pretty good. We had good conversations. And it was evident that if we just approached it with a way that was loving and respectful, but still truthful, and that's so important, we still bring the truth forward, then we have the ability to actually say something. They will listen to us because we've taken the time to listen to them. And we've even used this whole approach of tolerance as kind of, we've turned it around where all of a sudden they're saying, well, I'm not really too keen on those of you who hold that belief, who hold that Jesus Christ is the only way. We're like, well, hold on. In the name of tolerance, and in this claim of tolerance, you really need to give this a shake. You need to really think about this. So you can play it both ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, we're just scratching the surface, and we've got two major things we'll want to get into in probably successive podcasts. But I one thing I appreciate about you is you're not sitting at home reading an article about this. You got boots on the ground. You're at Burning Man. You're at the World Council of Religions, all over, not just once, and making a judgment. You're there consistently, and you're also not saying those meetings are a group of just wackos and just cultish people who are evil and sacrificing animals. And no, these are human beings. Many of them are very sincere. They're searching for truth. They're spiritually blinded, and you're willing to go to their home field and to talk to them, to listen. What is it that you believe? Let them share. And then it puts you in a good position to ask follow-up questions as to why do you believe that, what led you to those conclusions, and why do you think it's true, just sincerely. And then it could naturally give you an opportunity to say, oh, thanks for sharing that. This is kind of where I'm coming from. And once in a while, people will say, I never heard that before. That kind of makes sense. Tell me a little bit more. Yeah, some will resist, and that's fine, but some hearts are open. So I definitely appreciate that. I appreciate that your foundation is going all the way back to Genesis, because it's interesting. Today people are doubting the return of Christ, and Peter, writing about 2,000 years ago in Second Peter chapter 3, talks about the end times and the doubters of the return of Christ. And he said there are two major factors that are causing them, the skeptics of our day, to doubt the return of Christ. Again, you'd expect those things to be these two lofty spiritual things. It's not what Peter says. The two things that are causing them to doubt the return of Christ is they're rejecting the creation account and the flood. And I always tell my audiences, when I first read that, I thought, that's cool. I love talking about creation and the flood. But I never asked, why is it that connect? I didn't see the connection until I looked at it again. By rejecting the creation account, they're rejecting God as the ultimate authority. He created everything, He owns it, He gets to set the rules. They don't want that. Secondly, they reject the flood. Why? They're not really concerned about geology. That was God's judgment on mankind's sin. Well, these people, they're not sinners, they're good people, so they reject God's judgment. The return of Christ is another judgment of God. Peter says, not by water this time, it's going to be by fire. And so it's important for us to go back to lay that groundwork of the foundation. God did create everything. He owns it. He loves you. And He gets to set the rules. If you don't care for that, that's fine. But you might want to consider creating your own universe, because this one is His. So I appreciate that backdrop. We're going to do more episodes. I know two specific things we'll get into in a little bit more detail, because I've asked you to cover it and you're more of an expert. The concept of transhumanism, which we'll describe more next time, and then also global governance, which should really be of interest to people today, because especially here in the United States, we're just to the south of you, in case you didn't know. Um, in the United States, we're so myopic and we just think about ourselves and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. We are slowly being stripped of that and saying, no, we cannot just think of ourselves. We need to think on a global level, and we need to be controlled by a global governing body who knows the best for mankind. That's kind of scary. It makes sense if you're a skeptic. Why not? It makes perfect sense.
Right.
But from a Christian standpoint, that's a no-no. So you're going to be elucidating all those things in more detail in the next couple episodes. So I'm really, really excited about that. And I'm sure it's hard for you, because just getting warmed up and there's so many things you can get into.
But Jay, that's okay. I'm hoping that these conversations will allow people now to jump into it. And what I hope is that they're going to go after other sources to look into it some more, but then be wise. There's a lot of landmines out there. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of stuff that's just white noise and nonsense. And so that's why I appreciate the very fact that you're doing this show, as we want to dig into what is true.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate your background. I don't even remember anymore the first time we met each other. I know we've been out the Bree and Call conference in Oregon a few times, but maybe prior to that, can't remember which conference it was, but
Fargo.
Fargo. Oh, that's right. That's right. That was the first time. I remember that. I was there about three times, and I haven't heard from them in a while. But um, yeah, that's great. And I love going. I hardly ever get to go to a conference and listen to other speakers. So it was a treat to be there and to get to know you better. And that's why I reached out and wanted you part of this program. So for the next couple episodes, we're going to have Carl on again, going into even more detail. It's just going to get more and more and more interesting and more specific, and I think it'll be of great interest to all of it who are in our audience. So I appreciate your time being here with us these past two episodes, and we've got some more coming up. Most likely, we'll do two more now, and then later we'll reconvene and say, hey, let's think about these other topics, because again, we're just getting started here. So thanks again for your time, and to our audience, again, remember to subscribe to our podcast, tell your friends about it, and we will see you next time. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Starting Point Podcast. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe, tell a friend, and please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's the number one way to help us reach more and more people with these important and inspiring messages. To learn more about myself, Jay Seegert, and the Starting Point Project, please visit us at thestartingpointproject.com. We'll catch you next time.